I'm going to talk to you about the link between leadership, governance, corruption, and economic growth within the context of achieving sustainable economic growth and equitable distribution of resources, which is basically about achieving a just, inclusive, and sustainable economic world. The thoughts I'm going to share with you very quickly are based on what I've learned as a child and what I've learned in the last few years when working in civil society, in government, and now in academia and back in civil society. Let's start with leadership. Why is leadership important in sustainable economic growth? Well, I want to believe that leadership is at the center. I would like to believe that leadership is at the center of everything that humanity has ever done, whether that was positive or negative. I learned all of this from my parents, mainly, and both of them were Christians. And at the core of their lives were three particular values. Firstly, the value of integrity. They just believed that doing the right thing was the right thing to do, not because you were going to be found, not because you were going to end up in the criminal justice system, but just because it was the right thing to do. I remember that both my parents, my father and my mother, were very harsh if you brought home something that did not belong to you. And my father would chase young people who came to him with radios, irons, and kettles, because those were the only appliances that people could steal and sell. And he would take a shambok and chase a young person, because he was saying that if we buy stolen goods, we are thieves. Do you agree with me? Because without a market, nobody is going to sell stolen goods. My mom, on the other hand, studied all of our clothes, which I've done to my kids too. She knew exactly everything she had bought. And if you had an odd thing in the wardrobe that she never bought, she would ask you, where did that come from? The same thing applied to food. But a lot of the values that I will share with you now on leadership, corruption, and inclusive economic growth, I also learned as a Christian. I was raised as a Seventh-day Adventist. And I was also raised as a Methodist. Weird. I was also raised as a Zionist Christian church person. So how does that happen? It happened because my mom was a Seventh-day Adventist, my father's mom was a Methodist, and we were poor and we needed food. My parents sent us to Swaziland to study, and on Sundays we needed good food. My aunt, who went to the Zionist Christian church, gave us food only on grounds that we went to church with her. Well, the good thing is that he didn't take us to go and smuggle dacha, which some kids did. So at least she took us to church. So what did I learn about leadership? I learned that leadership is influencing and inspiring yourself and others to think in a particular way and to act in a particular way. So our colleagues have spoken about where Africa is and where Africa has been trying to go to. They've also mentioned where the world is today, fractured, and what the world has been trying to achieve since the First World War and the Second World War? Why is there a discrepancy between where we're trying to go as the world and where we are? And how do we make sure that going forward, we go where we want to arrive? I would say it all has to do with leadership. I think it's John Maxwell who says things rise and fall with leadership. But what kind of leadership has taken us to where we are? I believe that there's been a dissonance between what leaders have been trying to achieve and what they've been doing. And when I'm talking about leaders here, I'm not talking about only the top leaders, those in government. I'm talking about leaders from cradle to grave. But at the end of the day, we talk about we want to get to the right place. We want a society where everyone has a place. We want a society where everyone's humanity is affirmed and everyone's life is improved. And why is it that we haven't done that? Our policies have done something else, our actions have done something else, and our plans have done something else. I want to say that there's a systemic link between corruption, governance, and economic growth. If you govern impactfully and in a purpose-driven way, you're going to arrive at your economic growth. Of course, your path might be affected by the fact that the environment is broader, the context is broader, but at least you would achieve some of the goals that you're trying to achieve. But good governance is undermined by corruption. So I want to believe that with all of our good dreams in the world, in Africa and the rest of the world, there's been two things that have sabotaged what we're trying to achieve. Our policies have not been consistent with what we're trying to achieve. Corruption has also undermined what we're trying to achieve. And good governance has been sometimes the enemy. Let's go to corruption, one of my favorite subjects. Those who know that I was a public protector for 7 years, and one thing I learned during that period was how corruption undermines social justice, which is leveling the playing field in society. And one of the ways corruption undermines social justice in Africa is we look at those who went before us. When people are in leadership, or some people, when they're in leadership, they look at those who went before them and then they say, well, they did this, why can't we do it? When we were young, there was a joke about the homeland system. There was a guy by the name of Mpepo, and Mpepo was said to have argued for independence for Venda, and he wasn't very educated, Chief Mpepo. So he said, Bophuthatswana did it, Transkei did it, why can't we did it? It sounds funny, but in my 7 years as pub protector, whenever people were caught with their hands in the cookie jar, their approach would be, they did it under apartheid. White people have done it, why can't we do it? If you look at Africa, post-colonialism, post-Nkrumah, you found that our leaders, or some of our leaders, started emulating the very same governors they replaced by mostly prioritizing policies that are going to help the black elite, and particularly the politically connected, and paying less attention to the poor. But Africa is not a disease for Africans. I'm sorry, corruption is not a disease for Africans. corruption is a global disease. So why do others do it? Well, most of the cases that I investigated as a public protector involve big companies. You will see in some of the corruption scandals in South Africa, big companies that have been implicated include SAP, McKinsey, etc., KPMG. And then you ask yourself, why does this happen? One of the answers that I have received in the anti-corruption sectors is people say, if we don't cheat, we won't get in. I said I learned lessons about integrity from my parents, and their approach was not that if other people do it, you must do it. If you don't cheat, you're not going to get in. They were always grounded in their own values. You are who you are. You will get the world you are trying to create. You can't justify your actions or inactions by the beliefs of others or actions of others. But the last thing that I learned about corruption, that is globally, this is the worst now, how big companies get involved in corruption in Africa. And how good people sometimes get involved in corruption is there is a view about everything in moderation. Have you heard that? Everything in moderation, including moderation itself. That's the view that says corruption is okay as long as it is done moderately. Have you heard that one? But we only get really appalled when people are corrupt, when, for example, like here, when we had the issue of money spent in the president's house, which was $250 million in rands, and quite a sizable amount in dollars. But what about a person who bribes a traffic officer? What about a person who bribes the officer who dishes out mining licenses to get in the front of the queue? What about a person who bribes the person at Home Affairs who is dealing with business residences, permanent residences, and they get in front of the queue? Because you'll understand that when others get in front of the queue, others are pushed back to the back of the queue. And therefore, it's not first come, first serve, and it's not a level playing field. And therefore, if we want to end corruption, if we want social justice through corruption, through ending corruption, we have to deal with the small transgressions. And that's one thing that I learned. And I mentioned to you what my parents did, that it was really dealing with the small issues. Don't allow the iron to come to the house. Don't allow the jersey that you didn't buy to come to the house, or the sweater to come to the house. But what is the impact, truly the impact of corruption, bad governance, and all of these other perversions on an inclusive and growing economy? Well, the first thing is that you get an economy that is not based on the survival of the fittest. You get an economy that is based on the survival of the unfittest. Our countries, for example, would have, nationalization policies, or here we call it black economic empowerment or employment equity if it's employment. If instead of using those avenues to level the playing field in terms of historical injustices, but you use them to reward political supporters, to reward relatives, what happens is that you then put in those economic spaces people without an enterprising mind. When they get money, they go buy things in Dubai, they build the best of houses, but they don't necessarily grow the economy. So you have to think about, we here, most people in this room are entrepreneurs. You know yourself that building a successful enterprise takes years. But when you've built, when you have pitched yourself for a particular opportunity and you find that that opportunity is taken by somebody less competitive than you, it undermines your spirit. And next time, you're not going to invest so much in trying to get those opportunities. So survival of the unfittest. The second thing that corruption does is it perverts policies. instead of your policies being geared towards what your constitution paints as the future of your country, the vision of your country, you have policies that are about what do people want to achieve now. Let's look at Africa, for example. How many countries are building airports right now? Are all of those airports needed? I don't know, but I went to one country where I was told that the airport is hardly being used because somebody suddenly decided they needed an airport. I came across something like that as a public protector, where you have a department strategic plan that says in the next 3 to 5 years, this is what we're going to do, in line with our national development plan, in line with our constitutional vision. Or a municipality, it has that too. This is what we're going to do in the next 3 to 5 years to achieve the vision for this community. This is how this community is going to look. But out of the blue, you'll find a project that just mushrooms from nowhere. And it involves a lot of procurement, and then in the end, that's what is being prioritized. For example, as part of the fourth industrial revolution, out of the blue, there are countries that are investing in tablets. It would be interesting for me as an investigator to find out whose idea was it that we should invest in tablets. Was it part of an integrated development strategy, or was it a service provider who put that? I'm questioning that because, for example, if you're going to give Jabulani a tablet, who's being raised by his grandmother, Gogo Dlamini, in Polar Park, which is a poor informal settlement, there's no electricity there. But worse, Jabulani's siblings or uncles might be victims of unemployment and drug abuse. And if you're giving Jabulani a tablet to a house without electricity, to a community without Wi-Fi, and with uncles who have drug problems, so how many of those tablets are going to survive? If you're talking about an inclusive and just and sustainably growing economy, it becomes extremely important that leaders are on the driver's seat. It's not service providers and those who might benefit from those transactions who determine where you go. So poverty policies, perverted policies. The second thing is values-driven. Do we, when we make decisions, ask ourselves, will this advance justice? Will this advance social justice? Will it reduce poverty? Will it reduce inequality? And that takes me to using of data. Our countries need to use data to plan. We need to walk the journey to the future around what will the future look like if we implement this policy. And I'm currently involved in something that we call a MUSA plan for social justice, or M plan for social justice. It is to help governments from school governing boards right up to national governments to plan with data so that we can walk into the future in the virtual space before we walk in the real world. Lastly, there is the question of a culture of justification. Sometimes when we put people in power, they feel that being asked to justify their decisions is undermining their power. But we're not undermining their power, we're assisting them, because even the most benevolent of governments have within them persons with propensities for human failings. That's what Mandela said, that none of us have 360 vision. All of us can benefit from somebody saying, this is your blind spot. And that's why, for example, in this country, during the Mandela period of governance, nobody just came up with a law out of a little corner and rushed it through Parliament and then passed it through. We had a green paper, white paper, How did that help? Is that in the green paper you would say, why? What are you doing? Why are you doing it? What are your assumptions? And what do you hope to achieve through it? And then communities could come and test whether your assumptions are correct and whether where you're going is where you should be going. But what we're adding currently is we also need to add to that particular piece planning with data. That is my appeal to every country in the world, is to plan with data. If we're going to have an inclusive economy, we need to plan with data. If we're going to have a sustainable economy, we're going to plan with data. Because some of the things you can do will achieve growth for today. For example, in South Africa, our president is asking for 3 trillion investment. Please do invest in South Africa. But here's the deal. Please don't invest in anything that will undermine socioeconomic inclusion and ending poverty by 2030. Because somebody can invest, and we could look like we're growing if we're only looking at GDP. We could look like we're growing, but our growth would plummet in the next few years. And this is what the mining industry did into this country. In this country, people invested in mines, and temporarily it looked like we're growing, but who was benefiting? Syria has just done a study that shows that the communities where mining was taking place were left worse off than before the mines were introduced to those communities. And I saw it personally in Bapo Bamokale in the Northwest, where through corruption, approval of mining allows the mines to drill in front of your doorstep. Rock drilling in front of your doorstep. People have headaches, have dizziness, people are sick, and then the mine won't employ locals because they're sick, and it will employ people from others. Royalties have been chowed. The mines themselves don't pay all of the royalties they're supposed to pay. Those that have been paid, the elites in the community, chowed all of the money. The GDP rose during those years, but the people suffered. And this is how we end up with an economy globally today, where we're saying, actually, as we sit in this room right now, 2019, we're saying the world is besettled with unemployment and poverty. But do you know that statistics show that last year, the wealth of that 1% grew. As everyone was becoming poorer, the rich were becoming richer. And this is part of the research we're doing now to show that actually poverty grows exponentially. If you don't address it decisively and deliberately, it is going to grow. But what will make the difference? This is what I learned in the few years as a pub protector. But this is also what I learned among the leaders from the churches that I was part of throughout my life, is that leaders that can make a difference, it's not just any leader. Because leadership, as I said, is about influencing and inspiring others and yourself to think and act in a particular way. So anybody can do that. Hitler did that. He did inspire people to think and act in a particular way. So what kind of leaders are going to yield the Africa we want and the world we want? It's leaders like two people that I hold in high esteem. Both of them were born at the beginning of the 20th century, or no, towards the end of the 19th century, and they functioned mostly at the beginning of the 20th century. One is Pixley Kaisa Kaseme, and the other one is Charlotte Manya Maxege, both South Africans. They were both Christians. And what kind of leadership influenced their style? I could add Oliver Tambo to that group. There are many, but I would choose just these three. They were ethical in everything that they did. They did the right thing because it was the right thing to do. That's why their leadership was lasting. They were purpose-driven. Whatever they did was always influenced by what are they trying to do. In my work as a pub protector, I found that often people don't think about what am I trying to achieve, and will the action that I'm taking get me there? But more than anything else, these leaders were impact conscious. If you look at the Africa we've ended up with, it's not the Africa that our leaders wanted us to have. Trust me, all of them were as surprised as all of us as to why we've ended up here. And it's lack of impact consciousness. It's parochial thinking to say, I can take a little here. I can ask people to corruptly allow me to do this. But not realizing that if you ask your team to act in a corrupt way with you, your team will do it even when you're not there. And it is going to start from need, them wanting to be part of your inner circle, as has happened in many cases, and then it will go to greed. So firstly, they will comply with you because they don't want to be kicked out of the inner circle, and they will engage in that corruption. But after that, they will do it all on their own, and then you have a system of corruption. That is impact conscious. But lastly, what I learned from these leaders is committed to serve. And in this particular case, I'm going to single out not Charlotte McClegger for this one, Oliver Tambo. When Oliver Tambo was confronted with an apartheid system that was using atrocities to fight back, his own team started using atrocities to fight back. But he remembered what kind of world he was trying to create. And he then decided he was not going to use the enemy's tools and the enemy's values to achieve the future he wanted. And he brought in Albie Sachs and said, please help us to find out what's going on here and devise a code of conduct so that our actions can be consistent with the world we're trying to build. So that's how things went. Why did I choose these three leaders? Because all of them, like yourselves, were influenced by Christianity. All of them were influenced by trying to create that world where everyone's humanity is embraced and where we all win. They were trying to create an ecosystem where everyone wins, but we complement each other as Ubuntu. And I use Pixley Kaseme because he specifically said Africa will be a new leader that will give this world a new heart, a heart of Ubuntu, a heart where I am because you are, your success and my success are interlinked. And I think this community is based on that approach. I am because you are. If I make you succeed, I too will succeed. It is based on connecting our lights because we know that a light in the mountain is better than darkness. But if you connect the lights, you have a galaxy of stars that are definitely formidable against the darkness. Thank you, dear colleagues.